Next, we proceed to Plenary 2, how to finance the change we need to have. In this session, it is my very pleasure to introduce Moderator Kwangwoo, an honorable professor from KAIST College of Business and the head of Graduate School of Finance. Please welcome them.
Good afternoon. I got a big mission that we need to finish this session by 1 p.m. so that you have no further delay for lunch, okay? So please help me. And I already talked to our panelists that they can help me. So as Suji introduced me, I'm a finance professor at KAIST, and we have wonderful panelists here today. So I'd like to introduce each one of them. Frank Rijsberman is current GGGI Director General. Prior to joining GGGI, Dr. Rijsberman was the first director of the Water Sanitation Hygiene for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Seattle, Washington, United States. And also, he was serving as the program director of Google.org, which is the philanthropic arm of Google. Dr. Rijsberman has a PhD in water resource management from Colorado State University. Next, we have Dr. Kilaparti Ramakrishna, is the current head of strategic planning at GCF. Prior to joining GCF, Dr. Rama was in charge of UN Economic and Social Commission for East and Northeast Asia, where he was also serving environmental cooperation in the region. Dr. Rama holds PhD in international law and used to teach at Harvard Law School. And our next speaker, Dr. No Hee-jin, is #1 green finance person in Korea. So he's currently independent director at SK Securities and was a senior research fellow at Korea Capital Market Institute, and also a member of Presidential Committee for Green Growth. Lastly, but not the least, we have Mr. Lee Jong-hoon. He's the current director of Green Climate Policy Division at the Ministry of Economy and Finance. Director Lee is responsible for the governmental relationship with international organizations in Korea, such as GCF and GGGI. So, if you are interested in climate finance policy of Korea, Director Lee is the right person to talk to. Okay, so we have wonderful panelists in this session today. So let's turn to Frank, Dr. Rijsberman, for our main presentation. You're going to use the presentation slide, right? Okay.
Good morning. Afternoon already, actually, ladies and gentlemen. I've been asked to speak quickly to catch up. We're going to change pace quite a bit. So let me be clear. I think it is pretty clear that we are facing climate change. And when you speak to farmers in Africa or people living in the Pacific, they don't need more convincing science. They experience this in their daily lives already. I'm also convinced that we have quite a few technologies that can help solve the problem. And the key bottleneck is, where do we find the money to pay for those, right? So that's what we're addressing in this session. Is there enough money? Can we afford to make the transition that we'd like to see? Now, a first slide takes us a little bit more broad than just climate alone. For many of the governments that we support, they see that there is the NDCs, the contributions for the Paris Agreement, but also the SDGs, the global goals. And very often it is one sort of linked agenda. I think it's actually good that we start to think about that as not separate issues, but one together. Just to get you an idea of the order of magnitude, the World Bank guesstimated, I think, because precise numbers are of course hard to come by, that it takes about $4.5 trillion in investments per year to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And that currently we have a gap, an investment gap of $2.5 trillion per year. That's a lot of zeros to wrap your minds around. 3 more if you want to say it in one. Now, where is this gap? If we see that we need a lot of things, but to achieve the NDCs and SDGs, a lot of that will be sustainable infrastructure, in addition to, of course, expenditures on health and education and other big costs, big items of that. Energy, transport, water and sanitation, and communication are some really large components of that. And you see that in each of those, we're getting less than half, or in some cases only a third, of the kind of finance flowing to these sectors that we would need to achieve the SDGs. If you compare that then also with the current levels of official development finance, that is the development aid that many of us in international organizations are focused on, you see that that is a pretty small number compared to the gaps that are there. And then most of that development aid goes to governments. If you see the amounts that actually flow directly to the private sector, the numbers go down to hundreds of millions, not even billions, let alone trillions. In fact, the overall amount of development funding of the current investments, so this is not the gap, this is what is actually being invested right now, are something like 6-7%. Governments themselves are much bigger investors, and the private sector has a much larger chunk as well. Particularly in communications, more than half is direct private sector investment, and the other about 40% is coming from the government. Which really means that if we are looking only at development aid and the Green Climate Fund and so on, I think we're missing the picture. If we are going to achieve in resolving climate and sustainable development challenges, we'll have to find a way to pull these 3 areas together: development aid and government spending and the private sector. Now, is the private sector already investing in sustainable infrastructure, and is development aid currently mobilizing that private sector finance? A little bit. But the private sector finance mobilized through guarantees and syndicated loans and other ways that we currently have to mobilize private sector finance through topping up of development aid or through reducing the risks are only as little as 6 billion. Mind you, 6 billion sounds like a lot of money, but you need to compare that to the amounts required to achieve the goals. So that's really too small. Now, of course, we're trying hard to have specific climate finance institutions. The first and the one that I think the whole world is focused on is the Green Climate Fund. They originally got the first $10 billion committed. Not all of that came in. There's also foreign exchange risk. So I think the amount of money the Green Climate Fund has to commit is about 7 billion. My slide here says that about 200 million was disbursed. I'm sure Rama has a better number for that, but it's still likely less than 1 billion, just to put your mind sort of in the right frame. $1 billion compared to the trillions we need. The GEF is, the Global Environment Fund has been the largest and most successful fund that has operated for quite a while. It has provided some 17 billion in grants, and it counts to have mobilized an additional 88 billion in co-financing. Just to give you an idea. There are a few other initiatives, but together we're still talking about a low number of billions. Now, how can we spend those best? Much of that money has so far been given out as grants, but I think the key proposition that many of us in this field have come to is that we need to use that small amount of development financing better by leveraging more government and more private sector investment, sometimes called blended finance. If we're able to use the scarce funding from the Green Climate Fund as a top-up for a larger amount of money that then can come from governments and the private sector, we may be able to have that small amount of development finance go a much longer way. Now, what is stopping more money flowing into this space? It's interesting because when you speak to governments, they always say there is not enough money. And when you speak to the financiers, they say there is actually a lot of money, there are not enough good projects. And I think our conclusion is that indeed the lack of good projects, and good projects in terms of finance would be bankable projects or investable projects or investment grade projects, is a key bottleneck. Governments find it really hard to come up with projects that the GCF or private banks or the private sector can invest in. So that I think we should discuss. How do we get up to projects that the money that is there finds it attractive to invest in? The largest amount of money that's available, that is sort of sitting on the sidelines, are the institutional investors. Now you see the kind of numbers that match the gap that we saw originally. Institutional investors do have tens of trillions of dollars available. So why are they not investing? In the end, if we have to overcome this finance gap that we talked about in the beginning, if we're unable to mobilize the funders that you see here, the institutional investors, the banks, the private sector, the pension funds, then the chances that we're going to get there are really remote, in my view. So can these institutional investors come off the sidelines? So far they're investing really small amounts in sustainable infrastructure and even smaller amounts in the developing world. There is a growing area of what we can call socially responsible investing, particularly in Europe and the United States, but in Asia, the region we are in here, other than in Japan, this is still a very small and relatively underdeveloped sector. It would be good to hear maybe from some of our colleagues on the panel whether there are prospects to increase this. So how do we get more of these institutional investors to invest? And indeed, as I said, lack of investment grade projects is a key bottleneck we believe could help move more private sector investment if we are able to develop more of these investment grade projects. And that is what the Green Growth Institute is focused on. Now, just very briefly, if you haven't heard of GDGI, since we're still very new, we were set up in 2012 by about 12 countries at the Rio Plus 20 meeting, exactly to support governments to come up with ways to still have growth, green growth, that means economic growth for us that is environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive. We now have 30 member countries and another 30 countries on the road to joining, and we have staff embedded in governments in 30 countries to focus on, let me just say, the issues we discuss here. How to achieve the NDCs and SDGs through energy, water, sustainable landscapes, and green cities. So let me give you a few examples. Yes, we have also developed renewable energy projects that are based on grant funding. In Fiji, for instance, if you want to put utility scale renewable energy into an island that provides increased access as well as low emission energy, the project is attractive but too small for the private sector to finance. For $1 or $2 million, the private sector doesn't get out of bed. So here we'd have to find, in this case Koika, willing to do grant financing. Now in Vanuatu, which is another small island country in the Pacific, we helped set up a so-called National Green Energy Fund that can bring in larger amounts of international funding, including from the Green Climate Fund, and then retail that in smaller amounts into the private sector and into companies that can use that. That is one of the solutions that we think can blend finance. We can have such energy funds in which GCF can participate, but so can development banks and national sovereign wealth funds, and that can then provide debt finance to small and medium enterprises that are active in the off-grid energy sector, for instance. That can be bigger as well. Another similar example is the Access to Clean Energy Fund in India. That's a more than $100 million fund with a chunk from the Green Climate Fund, if the board approves it, with the largest amount of money from the Indian government. And again, it provides debt finance to the private sector, drawing in, we think, at least 3 times as much funding from the private sector. Those are examples, but and I have another one from Mongolia that I will skip in the interest of time. To get to what I think is the really good news, that if you have a situation quite similar to what I described for Fiji in the Nusa Tenggara Timor province of Indonesia, small, pretty much off-the-grid islands where they currently have mostly diesel electricity. In such conditions, solar plus batteries are already commercially attractive if the project is well designed and structured. In this case, that meant bringing 8 small islands together so that it becomes more than $15 million. Remember, I told you in Fiji, $1 or $2 million is not enough to get the private sector interested. But in this case, when it was 15 megawatts, likely $20 to $30 million investment in the end, Engie of France, a very large private developer, came to the table and signed a letter of commitment to the Indonesian government without any concessional or Green Climate Fund funding. That is an example that, in a way, we'll have to focus on more. How do we bring the private sector to the table? Similarly, in Thailand, coming up on not just clean energy supply, but energy efficiency, it is possible to draw in private sector companies if you structure projects like that appropriately. And in this case, it was an ESCO, a so-called energy service company, that made a commitment of $20 million to work with the Thai small and medium enterprises to increase their energy efficiency. I will stop giving you examples, but just to indicate from GGI, we have worked with a host of private sector parties to try and bring them to the climate finance table, hoping to draw in a much larger amount of money. I did want to say that we have to realize that the private sector is so much faster. Innovation and finance in the private sector can go within months rather than, the 1 or 2 years that it takes to develop a proposal for the Green Climate Fund. I was surprised, for instance, in 2017, and many of you will have read about the whole revolution in China, started in 2017 in China, their bike-sharing revolution. Well, within 1 year, companies went from nothing to hundreds of millions of dollars invested, and went from China to spread out in cities all over the world. That kind of speed, I think, that kind of speed of both innovation and finance is hard to match, but if we want to work nicely together with development finance, government, and the private sector, we'll have to somehow find a way to be more nimble and speed up our actions, I believe. Well, I would have liked to talk about e-mobility because I think that's the next big hot wave, whether it's electric buses or electric scooters. I don't have the time right now. I did want to remind you that there are many crossovers from renewable energy to agriculture, for instance, and using renewable energy for productive use. And I would have liked to talk a bit more about other ways the private sector can be engaged in renewable energy, particularly through biomass to energy projects, and to remind you that some of the largest opportunities to deal with climate change are what we call nature-based solutions. If we can help countries from Colombia to PNG, where I just was yesterday, to stop deforesting or to reforest landscapes in Ethiopia in the way that South Korea did here over the last few decades, we can make a huge contribution to climate change as well. So finally, indeed, we've helped, as I think our co-chair already said, mobilize about $1 billion just in the last 2 years, trying to demonstrate that indeed, if you come up with good projects, money is available. So that is the positive message. And indeed, of that billion, there was about 80 million that came from the Green Climate Fund, but a much larger multiple that came directly from the private sector. So finally, I think good to remember that the financing gap is trillions of dollars. That's the scale that we're talking about. Development funding is going to be only 6-7%. So we do somehow have to engage both public and private funding. Institutional investors do have the money, to close the gap, but they need bankability, and we do have to find ways to engage with the speed of change of private sector innovation. And I believe that climate finance, such as GCF has, should be used strategically to attract private investment and be more nimble. Now, and I think that we've started to show with GGI the development of bankable projects is a key bottleneck that can be overcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for your concise but to the point presentation. You know, it's been only 6 years that GGGI started, but we can see a lot of achievement they made. Not only the green infrastructure in public sector, but they have reached out to the private sector, and this is amazing that you've been doing in the considering that short period of time. But still, we are talking about this financing gap, and I think GCF is there. So last year, you two organizations made an MOU for a strategic alliance. So I think you've been working since then, and you have a lot of plans to work together. So Dr. Rama, can you make comments and also GCF side of story?
Thank you very much, Professor Park, and my dear friend Kim Sang-yup and KAIST for the invitation to be here. Frank, thank you. You made my job a lot easier in terms of what I need to spend my time on, given the limited amount of time we have to talk about it. The first point I would like to make is this. There are a number of figures that Frank's presentation contained. They are very helpful. They tell us in terms of how much of work that is being undertaken by various sectors, whether you call it blended finance or institutional investors, putting their money into these issues. But I want to talk about, just take a slight break from that and then go back to a point. The Green Climate Fund is a fund established by the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. We receive a mandate and policy guidance from the parties, and we report back to the parties in terms of what we did. So the context in which I'm making my comments is the context of the global negotiations under the United Nations auspices. One of the reasons why that is important is that the parties in the negotiations talk about a number that was floated in Copenhagen, not the Copenhagen of October. Many of you talked about the P4G summit, but the Copenhagen of 2009, the $100 billion. Now, if you look at the numbers that are advanced by Frank and a number of other scholars, you would find that a lot more than $100 billion is invested. So the question, of course, is when that is still an issue in the negotiations, are they missing something? What is the way forward? No, when you think about that, Green Climate Fund made Korea its home in December 2013. So we're going to be 5 years old come December 2018. Now, our first grant proposal was in 2015, and as Frank pointed out, it's about $10.2 billion, and without going into too much detail in terms of how much money is actually with us, there are a number of figures that I want to advance, but I don't want to take too much time here. But in short, what it is that we had approved 93 funding proposals to the tune of $4.6 billion. The $200 million that you talked about is really about $300 to $400 million, but that is the amount of money disbursed. But the number of projects under implementation is significantly higher. But that is not the point. The point is that the $10 billion that was pledged to GCF, and that is what the figure that the parties talk about when they talk about the $100 billion. The reason why we talk about the $100 billion is not only Copenhagen, but also because immediately after that in Cancun, there was a plan to spend $30 billion for 3 years on mitigation and adaptation and other climate-related activities, whether it is capacity development and whatnot. And at the end of the 3-year period, the parties have said that they have done that. Parties meaning by the industrialized countries. And when you think about the developing countries, they said, no, we didn't see any of that money. So where is that gone? So that is one of the key problems in terms of the pledges being made and the money, the numbers that are coming out in the international community. Now, without belaboring the point, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Kyoto Protocol. Under the Kyoto Protocol, you had the Adaptation Fund in 2001, and at the same time, there are 2 other funds that are created. I'm not talking about the Global Environment Facility, that was established in 1991 and has gone through 7 replenishments and so on. But the question to the parties always is, how much money was actually spent on climate in response to the pledges or the commitments that the industrialized countries have taken. And the Standing Committee on Finance was established in 2011 specifically to measure, report, and verify climate finance, including preparing for a biennial assessment. So the new assessment is coming out now. So those are the ones that are tracking all these numbers and then putting out what is needed. So true, there is a lot of money that is going into it, but whether that is going into it in response to the pledges made under the Framework Convention on Climate Change is the biggest part of it. I'll come to that in just a minute. The point that is made in the earlier sessions is very profound. It's about a variation of the precautionary principle that we have, which is cost of inaction is more than the cost of action. And so the question is, time to act is now. And then the IPCC 1.5 degrees report that is being referred to, and what that talks about specifically is, there are a lot of other interesting and important detail in that report, but one of the key points is that doing things to keep the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius has a direct and immediate impact across all of the 17 goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. So moving forward, what is it that we need to do? What we need to do is to make sure that the funding that is going into all these various channels is tracked, and you need to build confidence in the developing countries that it is not just about the $100 billion that is being talked about, but all the money that is going into it, into their countries and so on, is contributing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Just one figure I want to throw at you, which is, as the Secretary General talked about, is a $90 trillion investments in infrastructure until 2030. $90 trillion. So there is no reason for that investments to go without making sure that their impact on the global climate is kept to a minimum. The stock take, every 5 years after the Paris Agreement, they agreed to the stock take. So there is going to be a stock take in 2020, and that is going to tell us better in terms of the numbers that we are talking about. Just to conclude, I'm really pleased to be here in this country with Frank, where the GGGI and GCF are headquartered. And I think this is a great opportunity for Korea to play its leadership part, and I'm glad to see our officials from the Ministry of Economy and Finance here as well, because this is, the President of Korea has been talking about this not only in the recent P4G summit, but in the General Assembly session as well, about the importance that he accords to both GGGI and GCF. And there is a vacuum in terms of the United States and its leadership on these issues, and then that vacuum needs to be filled, and I think it's Korea that can fill that vacuum, and I think it is fora like this that is going to be profoundly important in making sure that this message is reaching far beyond this place. Thank you very much.
잠깐 순서를 바꾸려고. 맨 마지막에. So GCF and GGGI, they have only 6 years history, and GCF has also done a great achievement so far. And I think I like Dr. Rama's last statement that we're expecting some help from Korean government and support. And the current administration has shown pledge that we will continue this green growth policy. And I received Director Lee's presentation slides, and here they have plans how they can collaborate with GCF and GGF. So directly, would you like to make your comments first?
예, 안녕하십니까. 기획재정부에서 나온 이종훈 과장이라고 합니다. GGGI의 프랭크 사무총장께서 말씀하신 지속가능 발전 분야에서 약 2.5조 원 정도의 어떤 펀딩 갭이 있다고 말씀하셨는데 그 부분에 전적으로 동의를 하고 이제 제가 이제 담당하고 있는 기후 변화 분야에 있어서의 어떤 기후 재원의 수요와 공급의 측면에서 봤을 때도 구조적으로 기후 변화에 대한 그 대응에 필요한 수요는 많지만 그런 재원이 항상 부족한 상황이기 때문에 구조적으로 개발도상국가들에서는 이 기후 변화 대응을 위해서 많은 자금을 요구하고 있고 선진국에서는 또 일정 부분 약속을 하고 있지만은 개도국의 기후 변화 대응을 위한 그 자금으로는 충분치 않은 상황이 있습니다. 그래서 아까 GCF의 국장님이신 라마크리시나 닥터께서 말씀하신 바와 같이 이 부분은 이제 개도국하고 선진국들이 항상 치열하게 이제 논쟁을 하고 네고시에이션을 하는 분야입니다. 프랭크 사무총장이 말씀하신 거에 약간 코멘트를 제가 하자 그러면은 이 기후 변화 대응에 필요한 이 투자를 현재 어떤 비용 코스트로 볼 수도 있겠습니다만 지금 이게 현재 어떤 그런 투자가 미래의 어떤 부담을 최소화시킬 수 있는 부분이 있기 때문에 현재 어떤 그런 지출이 투자로서 인식될 수 있는 부분이 있다고 생각이 듭니다. 그 다음에 제가 또 말씀드리고 싶은 거는 기후 재원을 이렇게 조성하는 것도 매우 중요하지만은 조성된 기후 재원을 적절하게 효율적으로 사용하는 것도 중요합니다. 첫 번째로 이제 기후 조성에 있어서 지금 공적 자금만으로는 턱없이 좀 부족한 상황입니다. 그래서 민간 자본을 끌어들일 수, 유인할 수 있는 그런 메커니즘이 많이 필요한데 전통적인 그랜트나 대출 방식 외에도 어떤 보험이라든지 또는 보증, 코파이낸싱이라든지 이런 기법들을 활용하여서 민간에서 투자를 할 때 뱅크오브라는 프로젝트가 되기 위해서는 리스크를 많이 줄여야 되거든요. 그래서 그런 리스크 해칭할 수 있는 그런 금융 기법들이 좀 더 개발이 돼야 될 것 같고요. 그 다음에 이 조성된 재원이 보다 효율적으로 사용되기 위해서는 개도국 니즈에 맞는 수요에 맞는 사업이 개발이 되고 개도국들이 보다 효율적으로 이런 사업을 직접 사업을 수행할 수 있게 할 수 있는 역량 배양이 무엇보다 중요합니다. 이 부분에 있어서는 GGGI와 GCF가 많은 노력을 기울이고 있고 많은 투자를 하고 있어서 다행스럽게 생각하는데요. 추가로 말씀을 드릴 사항은 GCF가 현재 처음에 이제 2013년도에 12월 달에 출범을 하면서 102억 불을 이제 공유받기로 했는데 미국이 이제 좀 약속을 이행하지 않은 측면하고 이제 환 차선으로 인한 손실분이 있기 때문에 약 75억 불이 지금 들어올 것으로 예상이 됩니다. 그런데 지금 현재까지 46억 불을 썼고 GCF 사무국에 지금 현재 대기 중인 검토 중인 사업이 약 103개, 그다음에 약 63억 불에 달하는 사업 제안서가 제출되어서 좀 검토 중에 있습니다. 따라서 이러한 지금 재원 공여가 재원이 충분하지 않은 상황이기 때문에 지난 바레인 이사회에서 첫 번째 재원 공여 재원 보충 계획을 지금 발표하였고 내년 11월까지 어떤 제1차 재원 공여 프로그램을 마무리할 계획입니다. 저희가 이제 GCF를 유치를 하면서 우리가 이제 기후변화 당사국으로서는 개발도상국가에 해당되는데, 개발도상국가로는 가장 많은 1억 불을 이제 공유하였습니다. 잘 아시는 바와 같이 GCF가 이제 2013년 12월 달에 이제 출범한 이후에 조직이라든지 인력이 최근 한 5년 동안 5배에서 10배 정도 이렇게 커졌고, 예산 같은 경우에는 운영 예산은 1,800만 불에서 6,400만 불로 대폭 확대가 되면서 양적으로나 질적으로나 이렇게 자리를 잡고 급속하게 성장을 할 수 있었습니다. 특히 사업에 있어서는 2018년도에만 20억 불에 달하는 사업이 이제 승인이 되면서 개도국 기후변화 대응의 어떤 중추적인 역할을 하는 재원 메커니즘으로 자리를 하게 되었음을 말씀드립니다. 한 가지 이제 GCF 측에 이제 말씀드릴 사항은 지금 70여 개에 달하는 사업을 담당하는 인증기구가 있는데, 약 40개 이상이 이제 개발도상국에서 직접 접근을 할 수 있는 직접 적극 기관인데, 숫자로는 50% 이상에 달하지만 사업을 따내는 금액 측면에 있어서는 약 16%밖에 사업을 수행을 못하고 있어서, 그 부분에 있어서 좀 더 개발도상국가들이 직접 이렇게 사업을 수행하는 직접 인증기구들이 좀 더 많은 사업들을 발굴했으면 좋겠다는 말씀을 드립니다. 네, 이상입니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Director Lee. Yes. Now let's move on to Dr. No. Dr. No will give us the exact financing techniques of green infrastructure and financial strategies. So we're looking forward to that as Director Lee asked. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I think the current financial system is not good enough to raise sufficient money to tackle the climate change issues. Then, what should we do? We need to, I think, create additional green financial system to provide the money to the green project. Without that one, I think it will be hard to find, some good project, good green project. The banks can provide money. I think it's possible, but it's very limited. So the changing the financial system itself will be needed in the financial sector. Like the Earth system is the dangerous due to the climate change. So we need to change the financial system to provide more money to tackle those issues. That is the main theme of my presentation. Here the concept of green finance is in a sense important. That is the green finance is the finance to support green growth. Then, because the time is my presentation time is very limited, so I want to focus on the core parts. Here, some relevant terminology exists, such as the carbon finance, climate finance, green finance, environment finance, sustainable finance. So I think there exists some a little bit different, the sphere in this terminology. So here the green finance is the focus on supporting green growth projects or green growth technology or green growth economy or that kind of thing. But the climate finance is more focusing on the adaptation and mitigation issues. And the carbon finance is focusing on the reducing the carbon emissions. So they're a little bit different. So here the green finance is the finance to support green growth. So when we think of the green financial system in the funding side and the investment side, in the funding side, already the private sector money needs to be invested into the green the project. Already some speakers already presented in that way. I agree. But how? Currently, there exist several models of public-private partnership, such as the fund model and the Yojma model and the SBA model and the SIB model. I think those models are not exactly for supporting the green project, but that is the cooperation model between the public and private partners through the public and private partnership. That model can be applied to the green finance to attract more money from the private sector, the finance. So after reviewing this model, we can think which model is the best for attracting the private sector's money. Here, after reviewing this model for application to green finance, the Yojma model is recommended due to strong incentive to private investors. So private investors need to have some incentives for putting their money into the green project. And additionally, the SIB model, social impact bond model, can attract developed countries to support the developing countries more easily, because through this model, the developing countries carries out the project in advance, and if that project is successful, then the developed countries can compensate the invested money from the developing countries. So I think that kind of model can be applied for the green finance, green investment system. And here the investment side, in the traditional way, when we evaluate some, the project or the asset value, we need to use a capital asset pricing model. And the green project case, I think we need to add green value into this model. Then we can find some optimal green portfolio, then which can be used to which can be used by some green investors. Now, I think we know that already. Globally, there are emerging some, the green, green financial system, like for example, carbon market and the green financial products and green financial institutions and the GCF, and those kind of the factors of the green finance are already emerging globally. Now, then, how we can design the financial strategies to create the green financial system. The first strategy is the improve rules and regulations of green finance. Cap and trade system must be designed to run allocations and transactions of carbon emission rights efficiently and transparently, and to help green growth of the participating project. That is important, green growth. Developing countries cannot carry out some green project if their project does not contribute to the economic development or economic growth of the developing countries. Developed countries will be okay if their project supports some the environmental enhancement, even though their project is not the contributing to the economic development. But developing countries need to, the economic development. So the trading system, carbon trading system, also needs to design in that way. Then the establish green investment corporation is another strategy. There are some social features of green industry compared to traditional industry. That's why specialized financial corporations that reflect the characteristics of the green industry are needed. Additionally, green-only financial institutions can cooperate with the GCF more actively. So I think the traditional the financial companies are hard to put their money into the green projects because the traditional financial companies can have better projects in the not in the green project. Like they only seeking for the more profitable project. They take more profitable the project, but they can find more easily those kind of projects in the in a sense brown industry, not in the green industry. I think the GCF's role is very important. So through efficient utilization of GCF, domestic financial institutions can find opportunities to enter the markets of developing countries and find new business opportunities. So I think cooperation of the GCF will be needed. And designing code of conduct in green finance is needed. Code of conduct in green finance should be designed to benefit all parties fairly, which can lead to smooth introduction of green finance. Once in Korea, like in green lending, depositors can have some benefits, and also the borrowers can have some benefits, but the financial intermediary cannot have the benefit. In that case, that kind of approach cannot be sustainable. So all participants need to have some benefits in the code of conduct in green finance. Developing new financial products is needed. Through that kind of new financial products, funding scheme can be more easily designed. So consumer demand for eco-friendly products and services based on government support is on the rise, especially in Western society. And global cooperation system needs to be integrated. Like currently, the ETS market, the emission trading market in EU ETS exists, and the US ETS exists, but there is not Asian regional ETS that not exist. But in Korea, legally, we have the carbon market, and government allocate, and all those the scheme is based on the law. So the government, Korean government must do that. but some other countries currently do not, establish some legal the system for the carbon trading. So if the Korea's case can be exemplified and some Asia's the ETS system is established, then I think the Asian region and the EU and the American region can be the integrated, and the global carbon market is established. Then the more actively the carbon reduction market can be operated. Finally, the infrastructure establishment is needed, like some statutory infrastructure. This is the legal system and evaluation system, that kind of system, and some the technical infrastructure, such as developing the carbon bond index, or that kind of thing, and also some the human resources in the banking, in the financial sectors, to understand the environment and also to understand the finance. So the developing and the educating that kind of human resources will be needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Knowles. So Dr. Knowles gave us precise financing techniques of funding green infrastructure. Not only that, he also mentioned about constructing optimal green portfolios. And then later he suggested several alternatives for the financial strategies. I think we are past 1 p.m., 5 minutes after 1. However, I think a lot of you like to have some questions to us. And here we have more than 100 students. I'd like to give a privilege to assign students, just one student to ask question. Is Ki-bom Choi there? Ki-bom? Oh, you would like to ask? Okay.
Thanks, Professor, for introducing me. I'm Ki-bom, actually, and I'm currently doing an internship at Green Climate Fund. And thanks for all the comments and presentation as well. But my question is toward original discussions, because the existence of Green Climate Fund, I just try to de-risk the risk so that private investment would be injected. So far, that means like private investment could be more and further work in terms of private investment toward the Green Climate Fund. So that's why I think there could be several other thoughts on these areas, but I think in order to reduce GHG emissions and have a number of beneficiaries, adaptation to climate change, I think the role of Green Climate Fund is very vital and especially important. Yeah, so my question is,
to whom?
To Frank Rijsberman. So you talk about private investment, but private investment, unless it's not bankable project or unless they make money, they won't get invested. So the thing is to make it bankable and to induce the private investment. So we're in the context of green, but unless we're not a non-climate savvy investor, they won't get invest in green climate fund or etc. So I think that's the role of GCF. So try to ask you how to induce private investment toward green climate fund in a more efficient and efficient way. Yeah, thanks.
I think it's a mistake to think that we need the Green Climate Fund for every private investment to become attractive. Yes, there are areas that won't be funded by itself. You know, there were not going to be too many sanitation systems built without public support. But renewable energy has become the cheapest form of energy. Let that sink in for a moment, right? So many private investors will invest in renewable energy not because they get money from the Green Climate Fund, because they can make money for the same reason that they make investments in any other project. Now, In India, that is a burgeoning market. You don't really need the Green Climate Fund to invest in renewable energy. Many other small developing countries haven't had any renewable energy project yet. So then indeed we can use the Green Climate Fund to do the first projects, to open the market, to reduce risks. But if we don't get to a stage where the private sector will invest for the same old reason they invest everywhere else, we will not have enough money ever in the Green Climate Fund to solve the problem. So that is the stage where we have to get to, using the Green Climate Fund money smartly to make private sector investments commercially attractive.
Could I just, thank you very much for that, Frank. I think you would make an excellent spokesperson for the GCF. You're absolutely right. Not every investment that the world needs to make, it has to flow through the GCF. It is never intended to be that way. Our goal is, we seek to have 100% success in our project implementation, but even if every project is 100% successful, if that is all it does, we have failed in our mission. Our goal is to seek transformational change in the society, to make paradigmatic shift in the society, and so what we would like to aim for is really moving the country that takes our money to make the difference that is going to have a profound impact in its own economy. Just to add to the point that Frank has made, one of the people that I met with in Copenhagen is Peter Damasgaard Jensen. He works with a lot of institutional investors, and he raised a $200 billion for green bond. Didn't have anything to do with us. He succeeded fully. Now he's doubling that amount for an SDG fund. Again, he's not talking to us. So no, we are not saying that anything that goes on in the world has to go through the GCF, but the GCF is not set up for that purpose. GCF is set up with the purpose to some extent, de-risk the investments. But one of the points that Peter Jensen has made was, what is it that the institutional investors are more worried about? They're worried about currency risk and country risk. What is it that we can do from the GCF side to reduce those risks? And again, to add to the point, we do talk about creating fund of funds, and one of which is, we put a $250 million into a fund where private investors can come and add money to that. And if they suffer losses, they take money from this. If they don't, then they make money, and then our investment is secure. So those are the kinds of things that we try to do, and then and we continue to hope to do that with our next replenishment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think many of us are starting to starve, so we better stop at this moment. We have a wonderful panelist here. We have very rich discussion here. I regret that we couldn't have enough discussion in the floor, but we will have 1 hour lunchtime, so you can come confront to our speakers here so that we can have a more informal talk. So thank you very much. This is the end of this session.
Thank you very much. This ends the plenary 2 of Seoul CEC. All participants of plenary 2, please come up to the stage and take your pose for group photo session. Now we directly move to lunch and special speech, and also the lunchtime, because I know you are all hungry. Please not only enjoy your meal, but also listen carefully to this meaningful speech.